How's everyone doing? Coming to you guys live from LA. Hope you're all doing good out there. And I wanted to bring another UFC video to you guys. There's a couple things I want to talk about regarding the UFC and mixed martial arts. Considering the UFC is the face of mixed martial arts in this day and age of 2020 in the month of October. And there's just so much going on. Like, I'm just so confused in terms of what direction the company is leading into, because it's almost as though they're doing everything to maximize profits, but as a viewer, as a fan, as someone that's been following the sport and the company for a long time, I feel like they're losing touch with how they started from the beginning and how they made some great athletes. But now with the way they're going about doing things, I just don't see them succeeding in the long term, especially if it's going to be the way that they're headed right now. Because we have fighters jumping ranks, we have retired fighters coming back that were never really retired. We have so many weight division changes. We have the company offering cheap paydays for anyone that wants to fight. And it's almost as though the rankings of the fighters is just not taken into account anymore. I mean, fighters like Conor McGregor, John Jones, Anderson Silva, GSP, all these guys here went through the rankings and they got themselves to where they're at by beating their opponents and solidifying themselves as someone that would be remembered as great. But if unfortunately right now the way that things are being done, it's almost as though it's not going the way that it used to. Like, for example, fighters retiring again, and then saying that, like, oh, they're gonna come back, like Henry Cejudo. We see Khabib now retired, and I think there's one more fighter off the top of my head I can't exactly recall. But the point I'm trying to make is, right now it's October 28th, but the UFC is a bit boring to me for some reason. It's because it's almost as though its competitive nature is just not there at this very moment, and it's pretty, disinteresting to watch some fights knowing that some of these fighters aren't going to go anywhere. So, for example, October 31st, I think it's Anderson Silva and Uriah Hall that are going to be fighting in the main event. But I mean, Anderson Silva's a great, and Uriah Hall is someone that's been in the UFC for a while too. But as much as I think about it, why are these guys fighting in a company that's the face of mixed martial arts, knowing that they are not really going to get another chance at the belt? I mean, these guys had their time, they had their moment, they did good for the time that they were here in the UFC and in their careers ultimately. But I feel like using these old fighters again, just, I mean, sometimes it's fun to watch, but I would prefer the entire sport to be of its competitive nature in terms of its priority, because that's what actually makes it interesting, and that's when you want to know, okay, which fighter is who, and where is this guy coming from. So let me give you guys an example. So Paulo Costa and Israel Adesanya was fun because Paulo Costa was actually beating his opponents in the first round and knocking them out, and in the sense he was a ranked guy, coming up to the top and getting his chance at the belt against Israel Adesanya, even though he failed. But whenever I'm looking at some of the other things that are taking place in the UFC, and I'm not saying that the competitive nature is entirely done, I'm saying that the competitive nature isn't entirely the priority anymore of the company, from based on what I've been seeing in the last few events. So, I mean, the weight division changes when, you know, uh, fights don't work out for certain fighters, and there's also retired fighters coming back that were never really retired. I mean, what's up with all this stuff? And then it messes up the rankings. So it's really bizarre to watch, and is in a sense unfair to some of the other fighters, especially the new and up and coming guys. I feel like the brand is being cheapened out, And I think, in my opinion, the company isn't really going in the direction that it should, because as much as they've been, making changes, not all changes have been good. So, for example, they brought on Michael Chandler, and they all of a sudden they want to get him a title shot. I mean, what happened to fighters, beating other opponents and coming up for themselves and making a name for themselves? It's almost as though the UFC is kind of cheating other fighters, and in a sense ultimately cheating themselves to, you know get what they want the most, which is money. I mean, sure, certain fights are gonna make the biggest bang for the buck, but realistically, what got UFC to where it is today was what they were doing previously, when they were having fighters fight it out and get themselves in the position that they would want to be. So for the fighters that were hungry enough to go in for themselves and, beat their opponents and get the belt, then, then that's exactly what made the UFC. But right now they're just doing so many different things. I feel like the company is all over the place. I think the fighters that aren't really in it to get a belt anymore, I think that they should be dropped. So for example, Donald Cerrone, I love the dude. I mean, the guy's done phenomenal things in the sport. He's been very fun to watch, but I think it's time for him to move on, and I think it's the company's job to push him out, but push him out in a good way. And look, I love the UFC. I love Dana White. I think he's a great guy. I think the UFC is an excellent company. They've done a lot of positive. Okay, I have absolutely no idea what happened there. I got disconnected for some bizarre reason. My YouTube just went poof all of a sudden. But um, yeah, like I was saying, yeah, I feel like the UFC is all over the place right now. I feel like they're not really moving out like all these older fighters and bringing in some new faces. I know they're doing that with some divisions, but other divisions I know that they're not. And like we have Connor like coming back once a year, I don't know what's going on with Connor. I mean, Connor really brought up the company, and just look how big of a decline it's on ever since he started only fighting once a year, and you know just not being as into it as he used to be whenever he was ranked and fighting, and in his most competitive nature. And then recently we have Khabib, you know, being well, not being, but having his shine taken away by John Jones, because we have the argument of whether it's John Jones or Khabib that is currently considered the greatest of all time. Well, the thing is, Khabib hasn't. Khabib's only lost one round in the UFC, and he's fought a lot of big names. Connor was the biggest name. He did lose a round to Connor. That's the only person he's lost a round to. But in my opinion, John Jones is not the greatest of all time, because if it weren't for Khabib, then it would be GSP, and then if it weren't for GSP, um, I'd actually even put Henry Cejudo above John Jones realistically. But I mean, that's obviously something to think about. But right now, I can easily say that no, Khabib is definitely should definitely be considered the greatest of all time, or the best pound for pound. What am I saying? Not the greatest of all time, but the best pound for pound as of right now, because John Jones did lose to what's his face? I can't recall who he lost. Well, he didn't actually lose, but in a lot of the people's eyes, he lost in his last fight against. I don't know why his name is blanking out on me. But I will tell you right now. Yeah. So in a lot of our eyes, he lost to Dominic Reyes. So I mean, I don't know how he thinks that he's the best. He's one of the best of all time. Also considering that he's popped so many PEDs. But Yeah, I think there should be absolutely no argument in terms of Khabib securing himself as of right now, October 28th, 2020, as the best pound for pound. And that's always something that changes, right? And again, if it wasn't him, it would be GSP. And if it wasn't GSP, in my opinion, I would still do Henry Cejudo over John Jones because he's gotten two belts. So, and I really don't like the idea of fighters um, jumping weight divisions. I think that's pretty annoying, realistically speaking. I think the way it should work is okay, fighters should get a contract and stick to one weight division and only to be able to stick to that one weight division. Because like right now that messes up the rankings. It kind of destroys the competitive nature of the sport, and like it's almost as though everything is everywhere, and you don't. And there's a lot of there's a lot there's like a big smoke screen and you don't really know what's going on. I mean, certain weight divisions are good, but some of them are also not. But what the UFC should do, and I think what Dana White should do, is they should get a little bit more strict on how the rankings are positioned. I mean, they're still doing good for the most part, but I mean, they've just done so much from the side as well, to the point where it's like, it's like, okay, like what happened to the rankings? Like Shazmat Shimaev, like there's a bunch of guys that also want to fight too, and they don't want to fight Shazmat Shimaev, but in general they want fights, but they don't want fight. Oh, they want fights with not this opponent, but the other opponent. Now that's another thing that I don't like. I think the UFC should also double down on that too, and kind of force them in a sense and add into their contract that hey, if you're not gonna fight, you're gonna get dropped out. So I definitely like the attitude of Shazmat Chimaev. I think I don't think. See, here's the thing. I don't think that he deserved to jump a lot of rankings, even though the people that were ahead of him didn't want to fight him. I think that they should have been forced to fight, or they should have been booted entirely. So that kind of messes up the rankings. So we don't really know, how it's gonna play out. We don't know how Shazmat would be able to do if he were to fight somebody else. Even though I think he has a fight coming up with Chris Weidman, and I think that's gonna be a great one. I wonder how Chris would be able to fare against Shazmat in that fight, but we won't know until we wait and see. But I think that um, everything is everywhere right now. I think the UFC is the best company. I think Dana White is the best. I think they've done so good. And I think what they're doing right now is really good for the short term, but I think for the long term, to make it fun again in a sense, they should stick strictly to the rankings. I believe that they obviously have everything it takes to get back to where it was. It's kind of similar to the to WWE guys. If you were watching WWE, you know about the face arrow, right? And then they just changed so much over the years where everyone was like, oh my god, the face arrow and the WWE was the best thing ever. It was just so entertaining. And then over time it's almost as though the interest of watching the sport became more childish. So what the UFC actually, I mean what the WWE did, was pretty much shift their content to a different audience, which was pretty much like teenagers and kids. So they pretty much made the whole thing PG. But how it really started was from the face era. If you guys were watching WWE, so I know the UFC is obviously it's a sport, it's something real, it's not the WWE, but I think they should continue to stick with the rankings like they did, and that's exactly, I believe, how they would be able to make things more fun again. Because even for the fighters, if you stick strictly to the rankings, well, in that case, what happens is you get the fighters to be more competitive, and they tend to talk more against each other, and that's also another thing that always sells, right? Like the Diaz into like the Diaz brothers that would always fight. Everything was strictly ranked back then. And GSP made a name for himself by beating the competition. So the allowing weight division changes that are messing up the rankings. Fighters apparently calling retirements and then coming back, and that also changing the rankings. And then we have new fighters jumping the rankings, like Michael Chandler, and then we see other stuff, that the UFC should absolutely, put their finger on, with the controversy of which fighter should be considered the best pound for pound between Khabib and John Jones. And I think that the disrespect in the company from other fighters should stop, and I think that fighters should be more appreciated towards one another. Even though it is pretty fun whenever they're not, right? But it really depends on the scenario. I personally thought it was absolutely disrespectful of John Jones to attempt to steal Khabib's shine, saying that he's not the best pound for pound. Like, I don't know what to say, but to say shame on him. But again, like Connor only coming back for once a year, I mean, that's honestly pretty annoying. I mean, Connor is literally choosing his fight, so I don't really see how that really gets to you know factor in a healthy way to the rankings. But I think Dana White should definitely double down on rankings again. I think that's how they made the sport get to where it is today, and I think that they will eventually do that. So just we'll have to stay tuned. I know that there's a lot of old fighters and there's a lot of new fighters that are up and coming. So we'll have to see what happens, but ultimately, guys, I think the UFC is gonna get fun again. I think it's gonna get very fun again, and I think they're gonna be bringing on more people like Conor McGregor and creating more competition in the sport. So let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you guys think that the company is everywhere in terms of like what's going on, in terms of who's fighting who, and if you guys also think that the UFC should make certain changes in terms of how they classify on in terms of how the ranking should be. So again, so that people don't jump weight divisions and fake retired fighters coming back, and certain fighters only fighting once a year and certain fighters not wanting to fight at all. So drop some comments, guys, like the video, subscribe, let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you guys next time, guys. Peace.